Greetings, everyone. We continue our lecture series on the ritual and artistic development of sculpture with our emphasis in India, with our emphasis being on Hinduism. In our last session, we proceeded with a quite detailed consideration of the god Vishnu, which you see here. And now we're going to turn to the Indian god of Shiva. And remember, in our discussion, we focused both on iconography, that is signs and fixed ways that we can identify Shiva by having a knowledge of the understood meaning of those objects, like the chakram, the conch shell. We know from sources, we know from ritual practice that these signify Vishnu. And so it's an iconography in a system of signs to help us identify. India is a very diverse country. The subcontinent of India is even more diverse. The regionalism between different parts of India are dramatically different. And therefore, the devotion and the aspects of Hindu gods that an area or a region may focus on also vary. So just bear that in mind, but this has given you a very nice close look at a very classic articulation of Vishnu. And we also, apart from the iconography, we looked at style, and we looked at the contrast between high, intricate, ornate, decorative clothing and detail, surface detail, as a way to understand the beauty and the smoothness of the skin of the god Shiva by conspicuous contrast. We see this over and over again in Hindu art. It's a kind of aesthetic of effect. And one could also argue that this whole form that we're looking at here is so much less articulated by diverse shapes and designs and figures, that as a whole it stands out and our eye focuses on Vishnu, if only because surrounding Vishnu is an absolute densely packed world of stone details, all of which are relating back to the iconography of Vishnu, but also serving stylistically to frame in its complexity, its seeming complexity, the reduced and more simplified surface and form of Vishnu. Now we're moving to the Chola dynasty of the 9th to 13th centuries in South India. And in this area, we find the Chola was a great area of innovation within the arts, especially in the field of metalwork and particularly in bronze sculpture. The expanse of the Chola Empire extended, as we know from earlier sessions, but I'll just refresh your memory. Here's our Chola Empire here in South India. And it stretched all the way into Indonesia, Malaysia, and either had territory in Sri Lanka or had a significant influence. So when we look at Chola sculpture and we look at bronze work like this sculpture, this bronze sculpture of Shiva, we must understand that we are looking at a dynasty and a deep rooted aesthetic tradition established by the Chola dynasty that spread into Indonesia, Malaysia, Sri Lanka. So when looking at Chola art, we're also looking at the kinds of art that would have entered into present day Indonesia, Malaysia, and so forth, and South Asia, Cambodia, the bottom of Burma as well. And the forms of the Chola aesthetic and even figure types enter into these island area and fuse with other traditions to produce very rich results. And the last page in this module presents you with that. It's sadly quite short. It's only scratching the surface. It's placed there so you know it exists, and you can read more in your reading about it in your textbook that you've been provided, should you wish to. So now let us go focus more closely on Shiva as Lord of the Dance. This title, Nataraja, can be broken down into Nata, which means dance or performance, and Raja, king or lord. So literally his title is Lord of the Dance. This is a Chola invention, if we can use that word carefully with regard to deities. We don't find Shiva as Lord of the Dance in developing in the north of India. This is a southern innovation, and again, it spreads into Indonesia and so forth. As Lord of the Dance, what we find before us is, one other point that should be noted. In addition to the wealth, the longevity, and the technical skill of the Chola sculptors, they also had resources suited for working in bronze. For example, the Chola Empire stretched into Sri Lanka and gave the kingdom access to vast copper reserves that enabled the proliferation of bronze work by skilled artisans. Bronze, a combination of the metal which includes significantly valuable copper, and therefore the access to this resource also facilitated this great innovation and refinement of bronze sculpture. During this period in the Chola Empire, we also find, in addition to a new kind of material, or not so much new kind of material, bronze, but a great focus on it and a development of its expressive sculptural possibilities. During this period, also, this sculpture is one that combines the expressive qualities of stone temple carving with a rich iconography possible in bronze casting. So when you look at this sculpture of essentially a delicate ring, a ring of fire, a cosmic ring, which we'll talk more about, and the single slender, elegant ankle and foot of Shiva, which is crushing a negative figure, which we will talk about and have a detail of. This kind of delicacy in the hair and the details of the flames would not be possible in stone. It simply is too fragile. The stone would break. When working with stone, it was very important to have a lot of substance, a core, to protect it from slight bumps, jostling, and so forth, to protect the work of art. But metal is much more durable than stone when it comes to shapes like this, which would be impossible in stone. And this gives the expressive quality here is, of course, the body, this dancing figure of the body, and exquisitely rendered. Beautiful anatomy, graceful leg, delicate foot, delicate hands, and all of these graceful, not fully extended legs and arms. So every part of this dancing figure, has not flexed entirely any limbs. So there's this beautiful rhythm and harmony in terms of design of these slightly bent limbs. You see here how that works, how beautiful each of these rhythmic forms actually are, and how they all kind of form a kind of harmony. And if they were straight, it would be a very different effect. It'd be beautiful, but quite different inside this beautiful circle. Finally, in addition to the new expressive possibilities of working in bronze, this image of Shiva is taken from an ancient Indian manual of visual description, the Shilpa Shastras, or the science or rules of sculpture, which contained precise sets of measurements and shapes for limbs and proportions of the divine figures. Arms were to be long like stalks of bamboo, faces round like the moon. Here we have a good example of that. Eyes shaped like almonds. Or the leaves of a lotus. So there is other points about the body and proportions in this treatise and others like it. So there was a canon of beauty that the artist would have been exposed to and understood when designing this work. And these principles of beauty and harmony give a consistency to a particular aesthetic in southern India. And it's one, again, that we see strongly present in Southeast Asia, not just South Asia, which is the Indian subcontinent primarily. So we find Shiva here embodying perfect physical qualities, and he is frozen in the moment of his dance within the cosmic circle of fire that is the simultaneous and continuous creation and destruction of the universe. The ring of fire that surrounds the figure is the encapsulated cosmos of mass, time, and space, whose endless cycle of annihilation and regeneration moves in tune to the beat of Shiva's drum. Right up here. See, and he is taking this drum and he's striking it here against this surface. And the rhythm of his steps. And the drum is called a damaru, and whose beats syncopate the action, the act of creation and the passage of time. So whenever we dance, when we are, unless we're doing improvisational dance, we align to a rhythm, and it's necessary, especially if we're dancing in a group, to organize the choreography. So dance is inextricably linked to time because it's a temporal art. We talked about the difference between temporal art and ephemeral art and durable art. Well, here we have a durable art form. We can take this in at once or close to it, so it's not, we don't experience it in a temporal form ourselves, but it is expressing a temporal form of dance as as an indication of the nature of the cosmos and time, which is not a telos in the sense of it's always moving ever forward. Modern society, we would say perhaps in the Western world or overall as we globalize, tends to see time as a telos, meaning moving constantly in forward and progressing. But this clearly shows cycles. And it's not the hubris of humanity always marching forward to an ultimate high point insofar as the rebirth and regeneration of the universe. Now, the soul is something else, but the actual cosmos is in a constant state of destruction and recreation. And that is what Shiva represents. And his destruction is significantly linked to fire, and that's not surprising because we know how important fire has been in our study of the Vedas and the Vedic period and culture, which is absorbed into the Hindu belief entirely and deeply. We also have a sense of motion here because these are Shiva's matted hair, his matted locks. that are moving here to suggest the movement of Shiva, his dance, and within the cosmos of this a ring of fire. And again, these dreadlocks, to use a modern term for this type of condition of hair that's not being combed and is slowly forming these matted, uncombed, and not easy to comb strands of hair that become clumps. And that is a signifier in India of an ascetic way of life, an important signifier. So now we can just go through systematically, and your book does this also, but I think it's always good, particularly with such an important image, to take time to reiterate the text when we are on the same page, to say, so to speak, with the textbook by Dorinda Neave. So here we have a flaming nimbus or halo. We can call it that as well, a ring of fire here. Symbolizes the boundaries of the cosmos. And then here, I should have actually had this up instead of trying to use my own hair as an example. I forgot I had this slide. Sorry. Shiva's hair is matted like that of an ascetic. So here's a wonderful example of an ascetic which has his hair not only matted, but he's also ritually colored. And it's all an expression of the body as an expression of the inner life of the ascetic search for spiritual perfection by renouncing attention to the body. In the upper right hand, Shiva holds a drum, the Damaru, from which the vibrating sounds of creation emanate. So I'm reviewing what we looked at as a whole. And in the bronze sculpture, we see a continued interest in, along with this exquisite overall harmonious and proportioned design, a love of working on the surface to produce an incised decorative detail. Here, the entire ring of fire has these incisions that have been carved into the metal, probably, well, of course, after it's been fired. And these have been cast. So bronze, of course, is a process which involves making a model, usually in wax, and then making a mold, and then pouring molten metal into the mold. So the negative produces a positive in metal, which is why we can get some of these kinds of delicate details. His lower right hand, so remember, Shiva has 4 arms. So this is the one arm and hand. And then here's his lower. Is raised and facing the viewer in the gesture of the Abhaya Mudra, which says to the supplicant, that is, supplicant means someone who comes and prays and supplicates for help, for growth, for someone one prays to. And so he's assuring those who pray to him, be not afraid, for those who follow the path of righteousness will have my blessing. Oops, I think I've repeated. And then, so when we look at Shiva, we see 3 of his arms are on one side of the sculpture. So this is 1, 2, and then 3. And that alone is a really beautiful composition. And then we have a single arm here in his right hand, which is holding fire, which in his sacred flame, which he uses to destroy, so that regeneration can come. And so we can call this Agni, the flame of destruction that annihilates all that the sound of Dhamaro has drummed into existence. So you see between the two, we have a very nice articulation of Shiva as both creator here and destroyer. So one side is destroying, the other is beating out on his sacred drum, sacred creation. Finally, this marvelous hand that crosses over the torso and diagonally across his chest, with his palm facing down toward his raised left foot, which signifies spiritual grace and fulfillment through meditation and mastery over one's baser appetites. So this is in very much a suggestive of yoga, in the sense that yoga is a disciplining of the body and the mind to rise above the kinds of temptations that are physical appetites, sexual temptation, hunger, as well as our appetite for attention and other appetites that aren't so corporeal in nature, but are still base desires. The disciplining of the body makes the whole human form an instrument that is more armed to withstand temptations that arise in the body, like sexual temptation, like a desire to be a glutton, to overeat, or to eat to comfort yourself when you're upset. We some of us might find ourselves heartbroken or afraid or nervous, and find opening the refrigerator door is comforting. Well, that would be in this tradition the sign of someone who is not strong in the discipline of the body to withstand that temptation at a moment of inner turmoil, and and by practicing the discipline of yoga, you are training your body to be ready with a kind of armor that's been developed internally to withstand when a temptation of a baser appetite, when they arise when we are otherwise vulnerable. Finally, at the base, we have Shiva tramples the dwarf Apasmara, who represents the illusion that leads humankind astray. So this little creature that's being crushed by this delicate foot of Shiva is all the kinds of illusions that we find Krishna talking about to Arjuna. And you also, the video in this module that very much simplifies the Bhagavad Gita, but does a good job articulating various kinds of illusions that lead humankind astray. The illusion that I'm in control, that I am in control of the effects of my actions. That is an illusion. We should only focus on our actions without any thought to their effects, positive or negative. We just make sure that they are in accordance with what we are called to do, which in the Hindu tradition is our dharma. And so that's a kind of subtle illusion that leads human beings astray, thinking about the effect of their actions, which Apasmara is a personification of. But also more obvious kinds of illusions, the illusion that a lot of wealth will make you happy, the illusion that fame is going to be an answer to inner turmoil, or fame is something of the highest value to pursue. These are lower even more than the illusion that we should have any interest in the effects of our action. All of this is centering around a beautiful and seemingly paradoxical detachment from that which we are doing, while doing it with the greatest care. And if you think deeply about that, and the Bhagavad Gita addresses this in beautiful, subtle language, the less attached we are to our work, while at the same time, the higher degree that we are devoted to it, by being detached from its whatever will come from our work, is freeing energy to devote more to the work. And when it's done, it's not of any importance whether it's an Oscar performance or a catastrophic bad failure of some kind. It doesn't matter. It's, were you doing the work that you should be doing, whatever that may be? And that creates detachment, creates better work. And so all of these are the kinds of wonderful life lessons that can be drawn from the Hindu tradition, regardless of your faith, just in the same way that the Hindu tradition can draw from other faiths resonant lessons that would facilitate the achievement of mushka, if it's a Hindu person, say, reading sacred Abrahamic texts or Buddhist texts. So some of you probably are already realizing, especially I know some of you are quite religious, you're Buddhist, you're Christian, you're finding echoes and resonances with your own faith in the religious context we're studying. And that just, a Hindu would say that it deepens whatever you already are. And so I hope that it helps you see the way in which we can approach this material, especially if you're familiar with some of these principles in your own tradition. Maybe we'll highlight them more for you, refine them more, help you see them with greater intensity, and so forth. So lastly, before I end this session, then we have one more, I wanted to just give you a quote. It's also in your book. This is a 17th century reflection, a hymn in Tamil, the language of the Chola people, that is well suited to be placed beside the Shiva as Lord of the dance. O my Lord, thy hand holding the sacred drum has made and ordered the heavens and earth and other worlds and innumerable souls. All in here, much of it contained in negative space, so an infinite possibility of containment where there is no form. Thy lifted hand here protects both conscious and unconscious order of thy creation. All these hands are transformed by thy hand bearing fire, because fire must burn and destroy both good and bad, so regeneration can occur. Thy sacred foot, planted on the ground, gives an abode to the tired soul struggling in the toils of causality. The toils of causality is exactly what we were just discussing, this idea that we should be thinking about the cause of our action. Only whether our action is what we should be doing should be our only concern from this perspective. It is thy lifted foot that grants eternal bliss to those that approach thee. These 5 actions are indeed thy handiwork, and it should be said that the number 5 is sacred to Shiva. And there's much in the Puranas and in the Mahabharata that will teach you more about Shiva if you're interested. But the number 5, among many other associations we have no time to explore in this class, may be found and discovered in the figure of Shiva. This particular form has been long loved in the quote-unquote Western world and much written about, and a source of inspiration, and a little of your text touches on that. So that will end this session, and I will see you back for our next session in just a moment.